Ready for a bit of a head scratcher? Today we're going deep on climate action, but with a twist. We're looking at Pakistan. They're dealing with some of the worst climate impacts.
Yeah.
But get this, their carbon footprint is actually pretty small.
Yeah, it's a real case of climate injustice. Think about it, less than 1% of global emissions come from Pakistan. Yet they're consistently ranked as one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change.
So we're going to try to unpack all of this today. We're using excerpts from Pakistan climate change regime to guide us. Hopefully we uncover some stuff that surprises us along the way.
It's a story that goes beyond Pakistan too, you know. Sadly, this is happening all over the world. The countries that contribute the least to climate change are often hit the hardest.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to understand what's actually going on. To
Yeah.
really get a sense of what Pakistan is facing climate-wise, what are the major things they're dealing with?
Well, imagine a third of your country underwater. That's what happened in Pakistan in 2022. The floods were devastating. Over 33 million people were affected. And the damage, billions, just billions of dollars in damages.
A third of the entire country underwater.
It was a wake-up call for sure. It showed just how vulnerable Pakistan is to these kinds of extreme weather events. And it's not just floods either, you know. There are droughts, heat waves, even the glaciers in the Himalayas are melting because of climate change.
I bet that puts a ton of stress on the country and its people.
Absolutely. The economic cost is enormous, but also the social costs. It's a constant struggle for Pakistan just to recover and rebuild after these events.
So, knowing all of this, what is Pakistan doing about climate change? Have they been taking action or just bearing the brunt of it all?
They've been pretty active on the global stage, I'd say. For instance, they committed to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change way back in 1994, and they signed the Kyoto Protocol in 2001, plus the Paris Agreement in 2016.
So they're definitely at the table with all the other global leaders making promises and commitments. But what about actually doing something? How does that all translate into real action?
That's where the nationally determined contributions come in, or NDCs for short. It's like their climate action plan. They outline exactly what they're going to do to fight climate change. They submitted these to the UN in 2021.
Okay, so what's in their plan? What are their goals, and how ambitious are they?
They're aiming pretty high. Their big goal is to cut their projected greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030. 15% of that reduction they're doing no matter what. But the other 35%, that depends on getting help from other countries, like financial aid and technology from developed nations.
That's a big commitment, especially considering all the other challenges they're facing. What about specific things they've done? Are there any projects or programs that are actually making this happen?
Oh yeah, they've got some really impressive projects going on. The 10 Billion Trees Tsunami is a big one. It's a massive reforestation project. Basically, they're trying to restore forests that have been damaged and boost carbon sequestration.
I've heard of that one, 10 billion trees. That's a lot of trees. But are they actually making progress towards that goal?
It's been a bit of a mixed bag so far. They've definitely planted a lot of trees, but it's been tricky making sure those trees actually survive. And getting local communities involved in the project has also been a challenge.
I see. So it's more than just sticking trees in the ground. They've got to make sure those trees grow up healthy and make sure the project helps the people who live there. That makes sense. What other projects are they working on?
Another big one is Recharge Pakistan. This one focuses on water. They're trying to improve water resources and make Pakistan more resilient to climate change. Things like rainwater harvesting and restoring wetlands.
So they're attacking the problem from both sides. They're reducing emissions with the tree planting, and they're adapting to the impacts of climate change by managing water better. It sounds like a good plan, but who's in charge of all this? Who's making sure these projects actually happen?
Pakistan set up a whole system for that. It's their administrative framework for climate action. The main player is the Ministry of Climate Change and Environmental Coordination. They're the ones who come up with the policies and make sure everyone follows them.
Okay, so they're like the climate action headquarters. What about other groups involved?
Then there's the Pakistan Climate Change Council. They're more about strategy and making sure everything is coordinated at the national level. They bring all the different ministries and stakeholders together.
Sounds like they're trying to avoid working in silos, which is a good thing when you're dealing with a problem as big as climate change.
Exactly. And for the science side of things, they've got the Pakistan Climate Change Authority. They do the research and assessments, and they give expert advice to the government.
So you've got the people making the policies, the people coordinating everything, and the scientists doing the research. Seems like they've got it all figured out.
Plus, they've got a really good disaster risk management regime. It's there to handle the immediate impacts of climate disasters like floods and droughts.
That's got to be super important given how often those things happen in Pakistan. So on paper, it looks like they've got a solid plan
Yeah.
and the right people to make it happen. But as we all know, having a plan and actually doing it are two very different things.
That's where we start to see the difference between what they want to do and what's actually happening on the ground.
All right, let's get into that. What are some of the roadblocks they're hitting? And how is that affecting their ability to reach those climate goals?
That's exactly what we'll talk about after a quick break. Stick with us. So before the break, we were talking about how there's this gap between the climate policies Pakistan has and what's actually happening.
Yeah, it seems like there's always a but with these things. They've got the plans, the institutions, they've signed all the agreements, but something's stopping them from really tackling this problem. What is it?
It's complicated. There are a lot of factors at play. But if you look closely at Pakistan's National Climate Change Policy from 2021 and their National Adaptation Plan from 2023, you start to see a mix of really ambitious ideas and some serious shortcomings.
Okay, so let's break that down. What are some of the good things you see in these policies? And where do they fall short?
Both documents are really thorough. They cover pretty much everything. Reducing emissions, adapting to the impacts of climate change, capacity building, technology transfer, you name it. And they recognize that everyone needs to be involved, from the government to local communities.
So the vision is there, but what's stopping them from actually putting it into practice?
Well, resources are a big issue. These plans require a lot of money to implement, and Pakistan just doesn't have that kind of money. Then there's the coordination problem. You've got all these different ministries and agencies working on their own, which means there's no real joined-up action.
Ah, the classic bureaucracy problem. Everyone working in their own little bubble, not seeing the big picture.
Exactly. And then there's the elephant in the room, corruption.
Yeah, that's a tough one to solve. Corruption can really mess things up, even if you have the best plans in the world.
It really can. And in Pakistan's case, it's not just a small problem. It's a symptom of much deeper issues. Structural, political, administrative flaws that make it really hard to deal with climate change effectively.
So it's not just about fixing a few small things. It's about changing the whole system. What are some of those flaws?
One big one is centralization. Most of the decisions about climate action are made at the federal level, which means the provincial and local governments don't have much power or resources.
So the people who are closest to the problems don't have the ability to fix them. Doesn't seem very efficient.
It's not. Then there's a lack of transparency and accountability. It's hard to see what progress is being made, where the bottlenecks are, and who's responsible if things aren't getting done.
Which makes it easy for corruption to flourish. It's like a vicious cycle. Lack of accountability leads to corruption, which makes the system even weaker.
Exactly. And on top of all that, there's a capacity gap. Pakistan doesn't have enough people with the right skills to plan and implement these climate projects. So even if they had the money and the political will, they'd still struggle to get things done.
It sounds like they're facing an uphill battle. But what does all this mean for their climate goals? Those NDCs we talked about, are they even achievable with all these challenges?
That's the big question. And honestly, it's not looking good. All these problems together are making it very difficult for Pakistan to meet those targets.
So what now? Is there any hope for Pakistan? Can they overcome these obstacles and make a real difference on climate change?
It's definitely going to be tough, but I wouldn't say it's impossible. There are things they can do to improve the situation, but it's going to require a big shift in their approach, a change in mindset, and a commitment to tackling these root causes head on.
Okay, I'm ready for some good news. What needs to change? What can Pakistan do to build a more climate-resilient future?
We'll talk about that right after this.
Okay, so before the break, we were getting into some of the, well, tougher aspects of climate action in Pakistan. But you said there are things they can do to improve things. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about solutions. What are some concrete steps Pakistan can take to move towards a more climate-resilient future?
Well, for starters, they have to address the corruption problem. There's no way around it.
I can see how that's a major roadblock, yeah.
Yeah.
But how do you even begin to tackle something so ingrained in the system?
It's not a quick fix, that's for sure. But increasing transparency is crucial. They need systems in place to track everything related to climate action, climate finance, how projects are being implemented, the decision-making processes. All that needs to be out in the open for everyone to see.
So basically, shine a light on everything to discourage any shady dealings.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But is transparency enough to really root out corruption?
No, you also need strong anti-corruption institutions with real teeth. Institutions that can investigate and prosecute anyone involved in corruption, no matter how powerful they are. But that requires political will, a genuine commitment to upholding the rule of law.
A tall order, but yeah, it sounds essential. What else is on the to-do list for Pakistan?
We talked about how centralization is a problem, right? Well, the solution is decentralization. Give more power back to local communities. Let them be involved in designing and implementing climate projects from the very beginning.
That makes a lot of sense. After all, they're the ones who are most affected by climate change, and they often have the best understanding of what solutions will actually work in their communities.
Exactly. Plus, involving local communities directly gives them a sense of ownership, and that's really important if you want these solutions to be sustainable in the long run.
We also talked about the capacity gap, the lack of expertise in Pakistan to carry out these climate projects. How can they address that?
Investment in education and training is key. They need specialized programs to develop a workforce that's skilled in climate-smart solutions. And they need to support research institutions that are working on innovative solutions in areas like renewable energy, water management, and climate-resilient agriculture.
So it's about equipping people with the knowledge and skills to become climate leaders in their own communities.
Exactly. But while Pakistan has a lot of work to do domestically, it's important to remember that they're not alone in this fight. The global community, especially those developed countries that are historically the biggest emitters, have responsibility to help.
Right, it's about global solidarity. But what does that look like in practice?
It means providing financial and technological support to developing countries like Pakistan to help them adapt to climate change and transition to more sustainable development pathways. We're all in this together after all. Climate change doesn't stop at national borders.
It's been a really insightful deep dive. We started with what seemed like a paradox, a country experiencing some of the worst climate impacts, despite having a relatively small carbon footprint. We've seen the enormous challenges they face and how difficult it is to translate good intentions into effective action. But we've also identified some potential solutions, not just for Pakistan, but for other countries facing similar obstacles.
It's a reminder that climate action is a complex issue. It's not just about reducing emissions or building seawalls. It's about addressing deeper issues like governance, equity, and empowering communities to be part of the solution.
And for all of us listening, it raises some important questions. How can we support countries like Pakistan on their climate journey? What choices can we make in our own lives to contribute to a more just and sustainable world? What will our own climate action plan look like?
These are questions we're thinking about. The fight against climate change isn't just about data and policies. It's about the choices we make every day and the future we're building together.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new and are leaving with a sense of hope that positive change is possible, even in the face of immense challenges.